Hello, rock and rollers. Everybody! Ha ha ha! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 8th ElectroJet Rock Show. I'm Jett Electro, coming to you from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I got Professor Electro, my esteemed co-host, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
Hey, rock and rollers. Welcome to show number 8.
Right, so okay, here's what we're going to do. This one's going to be about the keyboard players. Oh man, this one, you guys, there's going to be a lot of angry people after this one from my choices, but, we'll get to those guys that you guys are thinking of. So, and I'm sure you'll give me some ideas too. So anyway, Professor, do you want to take the first one or should I?
I'll go first this time.
Okay, Professor Electro from Los Angeles, California is going to start with his number one. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the best keyboard players in rock and roll of all time. So, Professor's going to start first, and his number one. So, over to the Professor.
Okay, so I'm going to say once again, just like always, these are not in any particular order. We're not going best to first best to fifth best. These are no particular order, but these are the 5 that we feel are the best. Not necessarily our favorites, but who deserve credit for being the best in rock in the 70s and 80s. So the first one I picked, I got to go with Keith Emerson of ELP. He's just quintessential, got that classical sort of style, but mixed with rock. Kind of that prog rock, I guess, is what he's known for. And he did a lot of work in the early days with Moog synthesizers, custom Moog synthesizers. He actually did a lot of the customizing himself. And, of course, his work with ELP and did solo work also. And he did some work in movie soundtracks, if I'm not mistaken. He did work with some other famous musicians too, like Brad Delp of Boston and Cozy Powell when they had Emerson, Lake and Powell. And he's even in a short-lived band called The Best, which was with was Keith Emerson, John Entwistle, Joe Walsh, Jeff Skunk Baxter, and Simon Phillips on drums. Even though, unfortunately, sometimes like when you put a supergroup together like that, it's the songwriting sometimes is not what you'd want to or expect to hear, but still good stuff. And Keith Emerson, just super talented. He can shred on the keyboards, or he can, back off and do quiet, slower stuff. So that's my first choice, Keith Emerson. Oh, he also played, I got to also interject, early on he played with The Nice, which was kind of a somewhat short-lived band. That was in the 60s in his early days. And he was one of the first to shake the Hammond organ and make those kind of exploding sounds. And of course, later he merged with Greg Lake from King Crimson, and that's how they got going with ELP. So anyway, that's my first choice, Keith Emerson.
Wow, mate. If I was Jim Rome right now, I'd say phenomenal. Anywho, Jett here. I got to go with my number one choice of these 5. Mr. Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Ding, ding, ding.
Everything that the Professor said, completely ridiculous, totally rocks. A lot of great. I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer on the Black Moon tour at the place in Universal City. Oh my! And John Bonham's kid, Bonham played. My buddy Purdell worked on that record, by the way. It was really cool. But so they opened. I'm sure we're gonna do a whole thing on Keith Emerson, of course. The gig was incredibly good. That is a phenomenal record. The body of work from Emerson, Lake and Palmer is probably about the deepest one. Certainly the one that I can think of right now. It's just ridiculous how phenomenal all those guys are. Keith Emerson, my number one pick.
Okay, yeah, we're definitely in agreement on Keith Emerson. And kind of keeping in the prog rock genre, I also got to go with the Rick Wakeman of Yes. He's also classically trained and just had those shredding, arpeggiated, riffs and just great stuff from Rick Wakeman. Some ways in a little bit of a similar style to Keith Emerson, I guess only from a prog rock standpoint. And of course, Rick Wakeman was with Yes, and he did, solo work also. I remember right, he started off on, as a kid, on piano and clarinet, so he actually could play wind instruments also. And I think he also worked with Bowie early on in his career. So I'm going to have to go with Rick Wakeman as my second choice.
Outstanding. I'm going to go with Jon Lord from Deep Purple. Phenomenal. Saw him play in Whitesnake at Royce Hall. That was a fun gig. But his playing, I mean, all you got to do is just see footage of him, absolute virtuoso on the keyboards. And the fact that he played a Hammond makes it even cooler. Some people are more piano guys, some people are more like organ guys or like synth guys, but usually like some guys like Benny Anderson from ABBA example, that's like a piano, that's more of a piano band. But yeah, Jon Lord, absolutely phenomenal musician extraordinaire, and a complete, very cool rock star. Great performance. Legendary.
Okay, great choice. And I also, ding, 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 got to go with Jon Lord for my third pick. I agree with everything you just said, Jett. Deep Purple 1 early on, Deep Purple 2, and was worked with Whitesnake. And I was there at the same gig. I think I went with you to see Deep Purple at Whitesnake at Royce Hall in the mid-'80s. And, yeah, we had really good seats for that, and which was a great venue.
Ian Pace on the drums on that gig, too.
Yeah, that's where I was trying to think on our last show. We were talking about that, and that's where I saw Ian Pace was at that show. Yeah, he was great. And, also good when Deep Purple reformed, I think after Whitesnake. Also good with that. I think he also did some work with Frida from ABBA, some solo work. And he also did some orchestral type of work also, some of his solo work. But, all those Rainbow and Deep Purple keyboard players, they're all great. Don Airey, Tony Carey, David Stone, but you got to put Jon Lord at the top of the list there. So definitely, I definitely went with the same pick. Oh, I also think he worked with Clapton and Ringo Starr and George Harrison, if I'm not mistaken, also. He did some work with them also. So, yeah, my third pick, Jon Lord. I'm with you on that, Jett.
Righto, mate. Okay, rock and rollers, ladies and gentlemen. My number 3 pick for greatest rock and roll keyboard player of all time is Rick Wakeman. So yeah, of course, everything the professor said earlier. Everything the professor said earlier, mate. And also, he worked on a couple of Black Sabbath records. I think a lot of the keyboard players are him on that. He did a lot of sessions. Rick Wakeman is phenomenal composer. They composed a lot of that Yes stuff, I do believe, on the fly. I'm sure some of you Yes guys can correct me if I'm wrong, especially in the early days. Close to the Edge, arguably one of the greatest the greatest rock and roll album of all time. Just that alone. Oh yeah, I love Close to the Edge. That whole record, Siberian Khatru, totally rocks to the moon. So yeah, I can't say enough about Rick Wakeman.
Okay, yeah, we're definitely in agreement on Rick Wakeman. So for my next 2 choices, these are going to be a little more out of the box, but I think when I looked at their body of work and their contribution to rock music in general, I had these guys, these two players came to the top of the list. So my number 4 pick is going to be Billy Preston. Now, I chose Billy Preston because a lot of people consider him to be the 4th Beatle, or the 5th Beatle, I should say. He on Let It Be, Get Back. You know, he was the glue that was holding the band together, the Beatles together when they were falling apart. When they brought him in fact, I think it was John Lennon who wanted to bring him in and make him part of the band. And Paul McCartney was saying, look, we're having a hard enough time getting along with 4 guys. But actually, when they brought him in, he had like a sense of humor. He lightened the air and everything and made it more fun. He brought the fun back. And a lot of those sessions, the glue that was holding it together was Billy Preston. And he also did a lot of soundtrack work. He also worked later with the Rolling Stones and Joe Cocker. Just a lot of different, early on too, Little Richard, Sam Cooke, Ray Charles. Later he worked with George Harrison. Worked with Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood and Ringo, even with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So the guy worked with everybody. And, you know, he was always in demand. His work was always in demand. And even he had a couple of his solo albums that actually did quite well. And a couple songs, Nothing from Nothing and Will It Go Round in Circle. And basically Get Back, I think he got a writing credit on that. So, yep, that's my 4th choice. Billy Preston unfortunately died in around 2000, mid-2000s, somewhere around there, 2005, 2006. He had some health problems, but and he had some demons also, like a lot of these guys do, but just a fantastic keyboardist, Billy Preston.
Yeah, righto, Professor. That's a really great one. Outstanding. Okay, for my next one, I'm going to have to go with Steve Walsh from Kansas. Steve Walsh, amazing, phenomenal, has the Keith Emerson kind of technique. Plus, he just totally rocks to the moon. His pocket is incredible. His energy on record and in live in concert, especially back in the old days, is the greatest of all time. But even his keyboard playing is, he's like in there with like a Keith Emerson kind of keyboard player. Steve Walsh from Kansas.
Interesting choice, because that was on my honorable mentions list. When I say honorable, those are I have a group of about 5 that didn't make the top 5, but he's definitely in there. So Steve Walsh, absolutely great, just phenomenal musician all around. Just a great singer and a great keyboard player. It's unusual when you have a musician that can do 2 things at an elite level. Usually one of them suffers a little bit, where maybe they're not a great singer, but they're a great keyboard player or guitar player, but he can do both. So phenomenal. Great choice. So for my last choice, I'm going to go a little out of the box with this one, and I'm going to go with Billy Powell from Leonard Skinner. And I chose Billy Powell because he actually was a classically trained pianist, but initially he wasn't with the band. He was just friends with the bass player, Leon Wilkinson, and then he was roadieing for the band when they were young. And one day after a gig they had, there was a piano there. I think it was like a high school gig, like a talent show, something like that. He sat down at the piano, began playing. Ronnie Van Zant came over and go, wow, you didn't tell us that you could play piano like that. Why didn't you tell us? Well, you never asked. So they asked him to join the band, and he was in there all the way till he passed away in something like 2009 or 10. It's a pretty young age, too. I think he was only in his mid-50s. But, you know, if you listen to Sweet Home Alabama or Freebird, those songs, I think, even if they existed, they wouldn't be even close to being the same. And those are just timeless songs, especially the keyboard and the piano playing in Freebird. That's all Billy Powell. That song, you know, he's got his marks are all over that. So Billy Powell's my last choice from Leonard Skinner.
Outstanding one, Professor. Outstanding. Yeah, man. Love Skinner, man. He definitely rocked it with them. Okay, well, kids, for my last one, this is really tough. I could go with a guy that that I know he's probably one of the greatest, and you could argue the best of all time, John Purdell. Saw it firsthand. I was just a kid in a band, and they played at our school. Anyway, we'll do a whole thing on him, but I got to go with Greg Giuffria from Angel. How's that one, Professor?
Interesting choice. Yeah, he was actually on my honorable mentions list as well. So, and you and I got to see him at one of the few Angel concerts that came through LA. So we got to see him firsthand live.
Yeah, in fact, it was at Long Beach Arena on the Live Without a Net. They made a record out of that gig.
That's right.
But the thing about Greg is he's got kind of the Keith Emerson thing too. He's got a bit of the Rick Wakeman thing, but he also maybe has a little bit of the Faces kind of thing. You know, he can rock. He can just even rock a regular rock and roll piano. The third album actually has a lot of ELO influence to it, especially on the piano stuff. It's very piano-y for Angel. But speaking of Angel, the body of work and Greg's work in particular on those first four albums, they are all just phenomenal records, especially the second one, Hell of a Band. That one I think is probably just a little touch, maybe my favorite Angel album, but they're all great. The first one, second one, third one produced by Eddie Kramer. On Earth, that's a great album. That's the one that has the ELO kind of influence on some of the stuff. And then the fourth one with the bass player Felix Robinson replacing Mickey Jones. And the compositions on that White Hot album, are phenomenal. And Greg has a lot to do with it. Just a lot of, he's a very phenomenal keyboard player in the Rick Wakeman, Keith Emerson kind of thing. But with the rock and roll thing even more so thrown in. Absolutely phenomenal. So I'm going to go with Greg Giuffria.
Yeah, great choice, Greg Giuffria.
All right, you rock and rollers. So that is our number 5. We've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the greatest keyboard players in rock and roll. And there they are. Of course, we left a lot of people out. The professor thought of some that I didn't think of. That was phenomenal, Professor. Very, very, you nailed it on that one. Yeah, Billy Preston, Billy Powell. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, Greg Giuffria also, he was definitely on my honorable mentions list. I had one other, too, that almost made the list, and that was Jan Hammer. But,
of course.
This, again, trying to pick 5 only and trying to kind of have some balance in those choices, it's not always easy. So, and again, everybody out there, if you guys have some ones you think we left off or you want to, tell us what your 5 are, definitely jump down to the comment section below and leave us a comment. Let us know what your 5 are. If you think we're nuts that we picked this one or we left this one out, let us know. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Outstanding, Professor. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, rock and rollers. This was show number 8, the greatest keyboard players of all time in rock and roll. This is the ElectroJet Rock Show signing off. Rock and roll!
Rock and roll!